everybody. My name is Kat and I'm here at Peace Farm in Yarra Junction for the Downshifting Revolution. And I'd like you to all make yourselves as comfortable as you can be. Lie down if you need to. Turn off your video if you don't want to be seen, and grab a cup of tea, a drink of water, because we're about to have an amazing conversation with Maya Ward and Dan Palmer. Maya Ward is a beautiful friend of mine who lives just up the river, and she is an amazing author and writer. If you haven't read her first book, The Comfort of Water, about her pilgrimage up the Yarra from the sea to the source, then you must. And she also has another book coming out soon, which is even better, so stay tuned for that. And Dan Palmer is the founder of Permablitz, Designing for Life, Holistic Decision Making, Making Permaculture Stronger, and Very Edible Gardens. He has a PhD in systems thinking and contagious levels of enthusiasm for supporting the journey of others. He currently lives with his wife and 2 daughters in Castlemaine, so we're very lucky to have Dan. So this talk was supposed to be at Peace Farm in the flesh last November, but unfortunately Dan got ill and couldn't make it. So we're so lucky that we were able to reschedule it and do it by Zoom this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Wurundjeri country and give my deepest respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I would now like to hand over to Maya Ward.
Thank you so much, Kat Mackay, for such beautiful introductions, and for Peace Farm's role in facilitating Downshifting Revolution. This is the last in our series, and yes, thrilled to have Dan Palmer here with us tonight.
Pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to seeing what emerges over the next little while.
I think I'd like to shush and see if you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about what first drew you to permaculture, but just in a short story so that we can get into the substance of it, and say, if you could, your byline on your podcast is Making Permaculture Stronger. And I really like the fact that you're challenging this new discipline to go deeper. I was wondering whether you could say a little something about those two things.
Yeah, be happy to, Maya. I'll start with the second bit quickly, because just a small correction, it's not the byline, it's the actual title, is Making Permaculture Stronger. And the byline was quite recently updated to Regenerating Permaculture Design Process Together. And those words are pregnant with some really exciting meaning for me that I'd be happy to dive into together, if that's of interest. In terms of what initially drew me to permaculture, key to that experience was I'd spent a lot of time at university, and one thing I'd been doing for a lot of years, ending up with a PhD, was headbutting a kind of a brick wall made up of all these very deep separations or dualisms that I was discovering kind of constitute the foundation of modern civilization, like these very, very, very deep and hard to reconcile separations between humans and other animals, between mind and body, between theory and practice, between organism and environment, and so on. The list was sort of endless. And so I'd spent quite a lot of time intellectually trying to understand those and what the heck we're basing our civilization and education and solution seeking on all these false splits, that basically we'd torn the world apart, and how I was trying to make sense of that and how we might do something about healing the rifts. And then through some strange set of circumstances, I found myself sitting in front of Bill Mollison and Jeff Lawton in 2005 on a permaculture design course. And I got really excited because what they were talking about seemed to be all about dissolving those separations. Like Bill Mollison would talk about how we know what we ought to be doing when we build buildings and set up gardens and produce food and stuff. We just need to do it. And I had a lovely sense in my body as I was learning about permaculture of this dissolving of all kinds of like the split of where the house stops and the garden starts. Like if you look at any permaculture system, it's about blurring the boundary and becoming so thoroughly re-immersed and re-entrenched in your place and your particular spot and in tune with the seasons and the soils and all its particularities, so that it even starts to get a little bit hard to say where you stop and the garden starts. That really excited me. And so that's how it all started. So it really got my attention, because it felt like a really practical way of moving ahead in a separation dissolving way. Yeah.
Thank you. That is such a rich and perfect segue into the topic for tonight, which was really looking at perceiving whole systems, or depth perception, or systems thinking. This is when Dan and I first had a chance to chat, which wasn't that long ago, and in the break between lockdowns, I scooted up to Castlemaine and we had a little walk through the bush near there, and immediately started launching into this thing that we're both very, very interested in, is how do we, and I'm stopping here because I'm trying to access the knowing that I have deeper than the surface level anxiety of being here and trying to hold it together to make a nice experience for everyone. And I have to get a bit more vulnerable. I have to actually breathe a bit deeper and come more into my bones and feel my blood, and then go, yes, this thing I want to know, the thing I want to share in a cultural space relies on this. It relies on me being brave enough to be a bit more real and to feel how this thing that I so desperately want in culture, which is the ability to be with complexity and to be with life as it is, rather than just getting racy in the head. To be with real living systems, and to be in that space in front of all of you, of when I'm in my garden and I don't know where the garden ends and I begin, as you were saying, Dan. That's a really tricky space to talk about. And it's a really tricky thing to do as a community. It's a difficult thing to carry forth in some kind of learning. And it's very difficult to even talk about, hence my mash of these words. But Dan, do you have something that could save me from where I'm going?
I'd like to catch myself before I commit any acts of saving or rescue, unless someone's literally drowning. I think you're doing fine. So maybe I'd invite you to stay there for a little while, Maya, and just let you. I feel like you're really, you're in the right place. So why don't you say a little more if you'd like to, and then I'll be really happy to share what resonates for me.
Great. In this place where I drop into my body, the field of awareness opens up, which is exactly the space that I feel that I want to go in to really be in some reasonable depth of relationship with the more than human world, with the plants who I'd like to be part of my living system with the animals, for instance, when we're talking about design, when we're talking about how it is that we shape our lives alongside other living things. I know that I need to come into a place that feels quite vulnerable in the human world. And so for me, it's like there's the human world where I'm a human, and then there's my private world, just when it's me and other beings. And when we went for our walk, we talked about this, and we talked about how in order to work with living systems, as they really are, rather than just human projections, rather than just human ideas, we need to come into our bodies, soften, quieten, get a bit strange to ourselves in a way. And the question that we talked about then was, how do you do that? How do you do that when you go around to talk to people about how they'd like their garden laid out?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? There's really, really different ways of being and knowing. And one which is subtle and a little bit frightening or vulnerable or edgy, certainly a bit strange. And the other where we're not going beyond the human. Am I making sense?
There's a lot coming up for me as you're speaking. So yeah. So you're I'm sensing into what you're sharing in a way that, yeah, I'm not feeling lost, if that's what you mean.
Great.
One thing I'm getting as I'm listening is the feeling of where to enter the labyrinth or something, you know, like as there's been a huge part of my journey has been around, I mean, I'm a white, middle-aged, middle-class, university-trained male, and so a huge, and I believe that's predisposed me to kind of starting in a certain ballpark, which has been around prioritizing the logical and intellectual and rational, and kind of jumping to solutions and imposing and wanting to be right and not wanting to be wrong, or most certainly not wanting to be vulnerable, and without really realizing it, cutting myself off from my feelings. And if a feeling does sneak through, particularly in the context of you know, design or professional design, you know, shutting it down pretty fast, telling it's not welcome. So a huge, I mean, there's so many layers to this, you know, like a lot of it, there's a whole realm for me that's been around realizing the barriers that our culture has placed between us and actually being able to perceive, you know, simply to perceive, to witness, to see undivided flowing wholeness, you know, like living systems as wholes in flow and unfolding and enfolding and merging, realizing that we've been brought up to have these lenses that at the very least they slice the world up into little parts. So, you know, you can do this experiment with yourself. You know, you stand and you encounter a tree, and for me it's been possible to realize that I've got, you know, where I started was I would see the tree as just a collection of fragments. I would break it apart before I even realized I'd done that, and then try and understand the tree by trying to fit the, you know, the leaves and the branches and all the rest together without really having any contact with the kind of the underlying flow and continuous process of transformation that is the tree, where these so-called parts are simply kind of froth on the waves. So we unconsciously tend to smash the world apart, and we also freeze it. We make it still and stop it. So we see this frozen array of parts, which can sound, it sounds a bit funny to say, but I discovered that was really true. And so learning to let the world flow again and to start with seeing things as wholes has been enormous. And that brings me into the vulnerability you're speaking of, and the journey for me into not only letting feeling in and honoring its role as a part of me as a whole being, but realizing that it's not negotiable if I want to truly understand and honor and serve life and serve living systems. That one of my favorite quotes from a great inspiration of mine, Christopher Alexander, is that the intellect is too crude of a net to catch the whole, and often we try to think our way to wholeness. And I'm with him in the belief that it doesn't work that way. That that as humans we weren't given feelings just to, I don't know, to pull out at weddings and funerals or something. That they're a core aspect of what it means to be human, and always have been, and that to be able to perceive and understand and work with life and whole living systems, we've got to feel them. And that's been a delight for me to really embrace that and bring that into my work, where a lot of my work these days is around, I'm doing a lot of different kinds of design projects of big farms and development rooftops and all kinds of contexts, sometimes involving physical spaces and sometimes with businesses or organizations or relationships. A huge part of what I'm doing, even in those professional contexts, is really just feeling and just noticing and seeing what comes up for me, and then inviting the rational mind to come in behind to kind of cross-check and really honoring the gifts of all of me. And it's been quite a trip, ongoing. I feel like I'm only just taking baby steps, by the way.
Thank you. That was such a clear and beautiful answer, and really helped ground me. It's very interesting to me that when I start talking about this, I sort of fall apart. And maybe that's too much to say here in this group, but this was my challenge to us when we set this up, was how to talk about this, because it is so interesting for me, but so slippery. And there's something about being in that deep perceptual space where there's a lot of feeling, that as a culture we have relegated that to, as you said, weddings and funerals, and in my experience usually not even there.
That's right, yeah, to a point, but don't want to get too carried away.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm just thinking of the last funeral I went to, but that it's because it's so difficult to be a modern human, if we really allow it ourselves to be. It's very hard to be a modern human and a very, very deeply feeling person, because everything hits you at the animal level, and it impacts very, very strongly. The smell of exhaust, the ugliness of the shopping centre, the noise level of the background machines in our lives, really all of those intensify when we drop into our feeling selves. So a big part of the art of being a good feeler is to also have good and strong boundaries, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And learn to go between the worlds in a way, and which is often the definition of shamanism, of perceiving different states, different modes of perception, and being able to choose which mode of perception that you go into. When I was doing my PhD, I looked at this as a central question, because it became very obvious to me when I looked at the work of epigenetics and so forth, inherited trauma, that suppression of feeling has been going on for a few hundred years at a really quite a dramatic level. And when you look at the violence of the last few centuries, there's been a lot of shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
And that continues. And it's really my deep contention that the mess we're in and continue to be in is because we can't, as a culture, access these feeling states and use them culturally to help us transform. That's why I'm so interested in what you're doing with permaculture, because permaculture is a whole system of thinking that seeks to create permanent culture. How can we get through these next few decades, let alone next few centuries? How can we do that? It's looking more and more impossible, but part of me wonders that perhaps this virus is about breaking us through into a more subtle, complex, rich and vulnerable perception that might help us design new ways of doing things. And I'm that's a lot. I think there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it evokes a lot of me. It's wonderful. You were talking about if we exist in a space of sort of unbridled and open feeling, just to walk down a city street is going to about kill us. You know, there's so many contaminants and toxins in so many different dimensions. I mean, I believe a lot of that is because feeling was absent from the processes that generated those roads and buildings and all that. But yeah, that resonates with me, the idea that we accumulate armor. You know, we're born into almost pure feeling. Language and rationality and logic come along later. And with them and other ways, we build up beliefs and assumptions and stories and all kinds of things that become this very strong armor that protects us, protects that vulnerable space of feeling inside. So it's like quite functional, it plays its role, and yet the cost is heavy. Is that in that sense we can lose touch with that part of ourselves. And I also believe that unless we can regain contact with all of us, including our feelings, and invite that into the uncertainty and big question marks, existential scale question marks about humanity's trajectory over the next few decades. That's a key thing. Another thing that was coming up. I don't know if it's the right time to get into the question around permaculture, because a huge part of what I'm really fascinated by and excited by is bringing some of this conversation to permaculture in a focused way. You know, in a way that it's not we're not talking about sitting around and sharing our feelings. And that might be part of it, but we're talking about this in a way that's really important and useful, and is going to generate better designs, better layouts, which is a big focus in permaculture. And I just wanted to touch on this idea of a conscious shock. So I shared earlier that the byline of this project of mine, Making Permaculture Stronger, is regenerating permaculture design process together. And I've been diving into this idea of regeneration recently, and inspired by someone called Carol Sanford. And I really love her idea that authentic regeneration always involves some kind of shock or disruption, some sort of pattern interrupt, and getting away, like blowing away some of the froth or surface levels, which can include some of that armor we're talking about, and getting back to the core of something, the essential uniqueness of something, or the originating impulse of something, and then supporting fresh tissue to regrow from there, whether it's a person or a child or an adult or a relationship or a business or a farm or a landscape we're working with. You know, being able to just discern or distinguish between what's been imposed and in a way is holding it back from expressing itself, and what is it uniquely, and how do we support that uniqueness to be expressed. And that's what I'm attempting to do or participate in doing with permaculture, to ask the question around what's permaculture's originating impulse? What's really the essential core or the seed from which permaculture germinated? And what would it mean to go back there and then to let fresh tissue regrow? Because my understanding, having dived into it pretty deep, is that along the way, with like, I don't know how it could have been otherwise, permaculture has been infused, I don't know if you'd say infected, but by understandings about design and creation, which do prioritize the rational and which do pull in kind of linear mechanical processes, which I believe kind of shoot it in the foot a little bit. Maybe I'll stop there and I'll give you a chance to steer the conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something, the difference between feelings and feeling.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to clarify, because we use these words in quite loose ways. Feelings are, things that I feel like I would, when I use that word, it's like what I have. But feeling is more of a state of receptivity and openness, where I'm allowing more information in. I'm doing feeling. My feelings are telling me what that feeling is about, perhaps. But they're not the only thing. We have also our intellect and all other ways of knowing. But so they're linked. But we, like, for instance, in a design process, and I don't know what your experience is, but if I were to imagine myself in doing this kind of work, it's opening myself up to take in more feeling, to feel more, and then to work that through a whole lot of different information systems that I have at my disposal, if you like. That language seems clumsy, but I can, how does it make me feel? Does it make me feel delight or confusion or suppression, or to follow the goodness there, to follow the aliveness, and to trust that this organism is deeply linked to the organisms around, and to come into congruence, to get oneself within the ecosystem as a creative actor. So creativity is this thing that the body just does. So to get some of that intellect sort of quietened, and to just let creativity that is me happen alongside and with everything else. And so it's hard to talk about, much easier to talk about when I was a musician for a long time and just mastered the instrument, and there you are on stage with the other musicians, all good musicians, and just jamming and having sort of a pattern, like a theme or a melody, and then just letting it do its thing. So as a designer, perhaps you're letting it do its thing, letting the self do its creative thing alongside all the other creative things, and just almost be there to catch what's happening. That makes sense. Is your experience anything like that?
Oh yeah, there's a huge amount of resonance. I agree. It is a lot of my work is because I love I'm going to say bridging the worlds, but I like bringing in an intellectual rigor and a clarity of discernment and what, getting clear on what words mean. I'm doing a lot of writing about this, about what I'm calling a living design process, as well as being in the space of feeling as opposed to feelings, as you put it. I've in my language that I've been finding helpful, I talk about getting and thinking, And what I mean by getting is that receptive, open state you're talking about, and kind of cultivating a healthier relationship between the getting and the thinking, where they're both essential. And I really enjoy. I have a lot of fun with it, you know, like, because I'm often on actual landscapes, and sometimes I have people tagging along, they're learning with me, and I'll see the pattern. You know, what do you think should happen here, or how do you imagine this would unfold? What would be some good ways of proceeding? And our tendency is to think our way to some layout, and it's fun to bring that conscious shock and to hold a mirror up and let people realize that's what's happening. And then, so let's go back and just forget about the thinking and the planning and the measuring. Let's just walk around and do some getting, do some feeling. Oh wow, we noticed this, we noticed this, we noticed this, and then the thinking comes in due course. But it's like that helps the process get started. And there's this amazing sense I love of like another useful distinction. I come from a German colleague called Yasha Rohr, but he says there's procedures and processes, and often we'll use certain kinds of procedures which are kind of like paddling out on your surfboard and then trying to, you know, the way you try and catch the wave, and hopefully at some point you actually catch a wave, which is like that moment where the musicians or the dancers come into sync, and the underlying pattern reveals itself, and the whole thing just flows. And that's my experience of what design process can be, you know, rather than imposing these sort of rigid procedures, which is step 1, step 2, step 3. You might do a bit of that stuff here and there, but the idea is to listen and to get and to notice that there's something unfolding here. You know, I'm often working with people that have purchased a piece of land, and they're wanting to get into connection and let something emerge and flow. And my job is to resource that. And it's a beautiful thing, you know, and to support them to get in touch with it. And it's not about relying on external expertise. It's not about imposing, you know, good ideas from books or courses, including permaculture books and courses. It's, you know, being informed and resourced by that stuff, but learning to listen and discover, okay, wow, this is where things are pointing. And so let's this is the next step. And the next step, I thought I'd just mention maybe something like a tangible example. I'm working on these concrete rooftops, flat rooftops in the middle of Brunswick, where you'd say there's not a lot to feel, you know, they're pretty boring and homogeneous. Part of what I'm doing is walking around and imaging what it would be like to be me, but then to be a father or a mother or an older person or a younger person or a couple or a group or whatever, and just what they would be getting as they move through the space, and how you feel as you stand in the middle of the concrete rooftop, and how you feel at the edge, and the different energy you feel as you move out of the entrance point versus around on this little corner, and just acknowledging that stuff and mapping it, and then tuning into the kinds of things that want to happen up there that people would be, you know, you'd walk up there and think, oh, it's a nice day, it'd be lovely to sit and have a little picnic, or maybe in the time of COVID to sit up there and do some work on my laptop, and letting all that getting inform the thinking and what actually happens, and this incredible sense that it's almost like a birthing or a midwifing, you know, like these forms emerge out of the process. They're as much of a surprise to me as anyone, and they're beautiful, and they work, and they're harmonious, and yeah, it's a little bit. So the upshot is, yes, what you're saying does resonate with my experience of a process once you're in the game of life and wholeness and flow.
Yes, I really relate to that. It was such a long time ago when it began, because when I was an 18-year-old, I studied architecture, and then from there to landscape architecture. And really what would happen is I'd be going along thick in confusion and unhappiness and overwhelm for a few weeks, and then I'd have a sleepless night, and the whole design would come, and it was almost like it was coming from the sky, landing into my body, and I spent the whole night imagining and visualizing, and then I'd spend the next few months just trying to get that out of my body onto some sort of page so that I could share it. But the whole thing would always come all at once. Wow. Like which is called like the gestalt. And it's very similar with my writing process now. I'll have sleepless nights, and things will come, a whole story will come, and then it'll be weeks of trying to get it out of the body. But the thing is known. So it's and when that comes, it never feels like it comes from me. It comes through, and it's the thing that is wanting to come. So and I really resonate with what you said, that so many of our places are so ugly because I feel that they weren't felt. And as someone who studied architecture at university, I can attest that there was no encouragement to feel very deeply. And I could see that happening, which is why I ended up leaving, that they weren't whole bodies designing for other whole bodies, and the bodies of children, the bodies of old people, because a body can never be separated from its ecological context, but the mind can, and does, and will, particularly if it's afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Which, you know, by the time you get to architecture school, you've gone through a lot of pretty intense education and you're pretty afraid, is my thing.
Yeah, it's been fascinating working with architects on this project I'm talking about, and realizing that that's not a part of the standard approach to consider how it would actually feel as a human being with a body to move through these spaces. It's dominated by intellectual images and fashion, shapes and angles and stuff that are consistent with postmodern architectural fashions and so on, where the reality of how it will feel, which is also how it will function for real humans after the fact, gets a relatively small look in. It's been wonderful to in myself, as some of the processes I'm moving from a space of judgment and criticism and my way's better than your way, to inviting them into the conversation and finding ways to slowly disrupt the process, and I'm learning things from them, and hopefully they're we're learning together, and hopefully creating spaces that aren't quite so ugly.
I'd love to hear more about your disruptions. So we've talked perhaps abstractly, but actually it's quite real if you follow with what we're really saying. It's like, get into the body, feel. What are some of the disruptions that you found have been really effective to create a collaborative culture of transformative design?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure there's been a lot of examples from this particular project I've been alluding to. There's been a few moments where the products of two different approaches have been kind of put on the table in front of the developer in this case, and a conversation has happened about the pros and cons of each, and so I've had just a chance to explicitly share where I'm coming from and why this stuff matters. Another, I feel like a small moment that's maybe a better example would be early on. I said, well, it'd be great to, at the very beginning of this particular project, the buildings weren't built yet, so I wanted to at least look at the 3D images or whatever. And I said, have you got any walkthroughs or fly-throughs or anything, so I could just get a sense of what it would feel like to move through these spaces? And they were a bit sheepish, and they said, oh no, we haven't done anything like that. It was all designed using 2D plans and kind of image-based and designed to meet regulations and satisfy engineering requirements and look good in brochures and so on. So I think little things like that, just bringing a different perspective, and then having to hold my line. There's been a bit of, what the heck is this? This is not how we do things, Dan. You need to, and I know if I'm involved, this matters to me. In this particular case, I had incredible support from the developer, who for whatever reason put a lot of trust in me, so I was able to continue making these. And my style of these conscious shocks is relatively gentle compared to someone like Carol Sanford, who I've been learning from. She just kind of destroys people, wipes the floor with them. They come out for smiling and stronger, but I find my style is a little more gentle, and often it's around trying to find the right question to evoke reflection and to invite awareness that, oh right, okay, I'm approaching this in a default, intellectually dominated, automatic way, and there's other ways there, and I can do the work to notice I'm in a rut and climb out of it, and I can start to appreciate the benefits and how I can actually be of much more service in the world rather than just being another kind of automatic imposition machine or something.
Great. I'm starting to feel that I'd love to hear from other people.
Me too.
Yeah, I'd really, yeah. So, Kat, if you're there, wondering whether you could be our tech wizard for this next stage.
Yes, well, I might just give everybody the ability to unmute themselves, and maybe someone could raise a hand if they would like to ask a question, something like that.
Is Roz's hand up, Kat?
Yes. Let me just work out how to unmute everybody, or at least let you guys unmute yourself. Hang on, I'll just do that. Oh, here we go. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself now, Roz, if you'd like to do that.
I'm wondering if I can also share my video
We can see you.
with me. Can you? Oh, fab. I hope you haven't been seeing my pocket for the last hour.
Possibly. Yes, possibly we did.
Oh dear. Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I can just really resonate with what some of Dan was saying, and of course, I just thought I'm an artist, and I'm currently working on some pictures that we actually took together in the Big Packs Creek in the logging site where Kat, I say we went and spent some time moving in this environment, and yeah, and I know you're also familiar with this site that for a lot longer than I have been, and yeah, I just want to acknowledge that this thing of feeling is not necessarily the easiest place to go or to be, and as a dance artist, that I'm working very much in my body, and working very much in this place of sensing, working quite deeply, quite somatically with exploring my own materiality in a very physical way, but that also comes with emotions, and it comes with images, and it comes with thoughts, and yeah, my body I experience as in relationship with the land, and yeah, I recall moving in that site as pretty devastating, and coming back and having to be with, yes, some kind of shock in the body, and some kind of also a lot of anger and energy, and a will to respond, and I guess as an artist I'm responding quite creatively. Like, I'm currently exhibiting some photographs that were taken at the site, and we also have been developing a film, but these photographs have also led me to some text, and so there's a kind of work that I'm currently installing in a place in Berlin where I am now. So these images are being cited along with a poem or some text. You could call it a poem, but I guess it's a bit more of a activistic, has an undertone of that. And I guess what I like to question is this thing of feeling and permaculture, like how could that lead? I mean, I'm working in a very dance realm, and how maybe qualities of deeper feeling could better connect me with a way of living that related to grow. I mean, when I think about permaculture, I think about growing, or I think about plants and gardens and growing vegetables. And
Ros?
maybe you could speak to that. Yeah.
What's really interesting to me and what you said there at the end was how the things that we feel are not empty. They have their own information and will and ability to teach. So this is something that is very interesting to working with plants, is they're such, and this is going to sound so cliched or hippie, but they're beautiful beings. They are kind and wise and loving and rich and emotionally really intelligent. Now that sounds weird, but Dan, I'd love to hand it over to you now, but I feel like to work with these things that give us life, they have really healthful messages that can really strengthen us and can create art that is so much less neurotic. Do you know what I'm saying, Dan?
I'm not sure. I could speak a little bit. I actually got a little caught up. I was so I just mentioned where it was when both of you are speaking, acknowledging the complexity of the feeling space and the ambiguity of the word. And one important aspect of, I mean, I'll mention in the permaculture conversation, I run workshops on advanced design process with David Holmgren, and he's I mean, he talks about how he was raised by hyper rationalists, and it's been quite a journey for him to allow intuitive aspects into his realm. He has a healthy skepticism about I guess the dangers of feelings in the design process. So we have quite robust conversations sometimes in the middle of a workshop, trying to kind of nut this out. And I can really relate to what some of the concerns he brings. One of them is that he sees that feelings can sometimes be quite subjective, and as you were talking, Ros, I was thinking about that sense of, you visited the site and you felt anger, which in this case has been really, which you've been able to process it, it sounds like, and channel in a healthy way. And one distinction I've found useful that I've been learning about is, some people call it the distinction between emotions and feelings, but the idea that some of the stuff you feel is more to do with things that have happened to you in the past, in the current moment is evoking that in you. And so to ascribe that to this particular tree or this particular situation is a mistake. So it's like cultivating that discernment. Whereas I think if we can deal with a lot of that past stuff, we can get to a point where what we're feeling is telling us about what's happening here. And if we can get to that state, and Christopher Alexander talks about this, you can actually get a surprising degree of agreement. Different people will feel, there'll be a huge amount of overlap in what they feel. And that's an exciting thing, because usually we discard or write feelings off as utterly subjective, and we need science, we need data, we need rationality, and so on. So I was just,
I'm so excited that you've brought us to this point, because this is something I really wanted to speak to, because that's absolutely the point of this work, is to get beyond subjectivity and to get to shared objective perception of the natural, of whatever it is we're working with. So Goethe, who this amazing German scientist who is the main influence on Rudolf Steiner, so Steiner schools and biodynamics and all of the rest, he talks about this, and he was writing in around 1800 about this, but he writes about it in quite a modern way. He said, you have to work on your stuff. You have to work on your personal stuff before you can accurately perceive the natural world. But when you do that, you can perceive it objectively. So this is really the point that I was very much hoping we would get to. Feelings as objective, deep, powerful, true